everybody. Welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Bicassa. We're on the line today with Jan David Axtell. And Jan, you're from Livingston, Montana, but you spent a lot of time in fly fishing. In fact, when I wrote my notes, you've been in fly fishing for 30 years as a guide, and you not only guided for 30 years, but what I really liked about your personality and your experience was that you guided from the East Coast to the Midwest to the West Coast. So your plethora of knowledge regarding those three regions is really high. The cool thing is, guys, is that Jan has finished his time. He says he's kind of set put. We'll check on that with you, bud. But it sounds like you're in Livingston, Montana, and you're guiding around the Yellowstone River, some of the spring creeks around there, et cetera. And we haven't had a ton of information on there. So I'm really looking forward to that. So today, we're going to talk about the Livingston area fly fishing, Yellowstone, spring creeks, etc. And then we're going to jump into the last part of the show, which is your value add. And that's going to be us talking about the stock or spot and stock technique of fly fishing. So going out and really seeing a fish, stalking it, and catching it. Jan, you tend to be an expert in that area, so we're really looking forward to it. And let's start going from there, my man. So, Jan, how you been today? You hanging in there?
Great, Christian. Thanks for having me on the podcast. The word expert I'm not always comfortable with, but a student of the game maybe is more appropriate.
Yeah.
Certainly, I've enjoyed fly fishing across the country for a long time, and I am a full-on addict. And as my very understanding and loving wife can attest, and daughter, that they have seen me in what they refer to as the fishing trance many times. And so I'm happy to be here and share with what I have, and maybe people can use it, and I hope it makes their experience on the water better.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, and I agree. Experts, it's a tough one because you always feel like you can know more.
Right, learn early on never to refer to yourself as an expert.
Right. And the trance is perfect. The trance is perfect because you get those blinders on, and it's like
you just kind of go into the moment.
The circles on your eyes, etc. So you're in Livingston now. You had been there before, visiting, etc. But you really started to make this your home, and you've been guiding there for several years now. Tell us a little bit about the region, what it has to offer, and then let's dive into some of those as some examples.
Well, Livingston is an amazing community. It's also a pretty remarkable landscape. We're blessed to have the Yellowstone River and Yellowstone Park to the south, and the river runs right through Livingston. In fact, the movie A River Runs Through It, part of it was filmed on the Yellowstone River south of Livingston. We also have 3 world-class spring creeks in our community in Depew Spring Creek, Armstrong's Spring Creek, and Nelson Spring Creek, just south of town, a few miles. And the Yellowstone offers, this region offers, trophy class Western fly fishing for everyone, just because the access to public water, as well as some private water there are very few places like it left in the country. And so Livingston, I came through Livingston in 1997 when I was at the University of Wisconsin. I was helping teach a field biology course, and I was thought to myself, wow, I could probably come back here. As the world turns, I'm back here. And so my wife and I moved here in 2015. We've been living in Paradise Valley and working in the community for 8 years now, and really love it here. Yeah. So
you're just wishing you had purchased land in '97. That's the only difference. Right?
I didn't have much to rub together to purchase anything in 1997, but I wish I would have bought something in 1997.
Right. Couple nymphs and a woolly bugger doesn't.
That's all you need, really.
3-4 acres. Oh man, well, cool. Livingston is a cool area. If you're going to fish there, what's the best location to fly into or to relocate to get there?
Well, one of the really attractive things about Livingston is that it's less than 45 minutes from the Bozeman Airport. Mm-hmm. When I say 45 minutes, I live in the valley, so it's more. So I got to drive up into town, then over, but it's about 25 miles to the airport. So you can fly into Bozeman. You could be in Livingston in 30 minutes. And so it's accessible. I-90 runs right through our community. So if you're driving and if you're kind of like planning the nomad fishing vacation and hitting the major spots in the West, the Madison, the Henry's Fork, the Bitterroot, etc., we're right on your path there.
Right on your path. And then you have a lot to offer too with the Yellowstone. You get the fire hole right in there and a couple of the others.
The Yellowstone River runs right through here. The park is roughly 50 miles south of Livingston. So you can fish the Gardner. You can fish a host of stillwater lakes. You can fish the northeast corner of the park in the Lamar, Soda Butte, and the Slough Creek. The west fork or the Clark's Fork of the Yellowstone.
Oh yeah.
And then a little farther drive gets you down into the Upper Madison, the Gibbon, the Firehole, etc.
When you had mentioned Stillwater, we got a lot of Stillwater people on our show. Is the Stillwater starting to become more discovered in your area?
Because a lot of our Stillwater lakes are high alpine lakes, they're a little bit hard to access early in the season, which is a lot of it. But slowly but surely, it is getting some foothold. I've guided a number of trips on Trout Lake up in the northeast corner of the park. Hebgen Lake is not a far drive. It's like a couple hours from here.
Oh, okay.
There's Daly Lake that has really great populations of rainbow trout in it that early on in the season at ice off fishes pretty well.
Yeah.
And then a host of other like farm ponds, et cetera, that are either stock or have wild reproducing trout in them as well. Going to the north and to the east of here, Burns Lake is one. The Checkerboard Lakes are another one that we fish Stillwater pretty regularly.
That's good. That's good. It's pretty fun. It's gaining a lot of traction everywhere. I think people are starting to understand that there's a lot of high quality fish in lakes, and if you learn how to read the water, which really isn't that bad, once you get the basics, you can do really well. So people tend to look at it as like a blank canvas.
Finding that level where the fish are and fishing that. And I think that equipment has come a long way in the way of sinking lines that allow you to access water that maybe as anglers, it was difficult to access with just kind of an intermediate or a straight floating
or a weighted fly or something. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. And so it's come a long way. I have some friends who are full on junkies and I'm always pleased to get photographs from them.
Yeah, cool. So you talked a little bit at the beginning about some of the spring creeks and rivers around the area, and you had mentioned to me earlier that a lot of the fishing that you're doing or guiding that you're doing is in and around those areas. And I think that's probably a classic perspective in the fact that a lot of people come out to Montana to fish those dry flies and get those Western experiences. So tell us in detail about some of those rivers and creeks around you and some of the trips that you've led and experiences.
Oh yeah. To start with, the Yellowstone River it's a blue ribbon trout fishery. We had a very large flood last year that made the national news. That's not what we want to make the news for, but they do catch fish in excess of 28 inches in the Yellowstone River. It's known for having some very large brown trout and accessible hopper fishing. It's probably best fished in a drift boat. Drifting large Western dry flies, the chubby Chernobyl or the hopper with a dropper rig, but also fishes with streamers really, really well. And there's just so much access to be able to float the river through Paradise Valley, and even as you head east toward Billings, Montana, or Big Timber in that area. And it's just one of those quintessential big Western rivers that maybe you read about. If you don't live in the West, maybe you read about in a magazine as a new angler, or read about now. And I'm always amazed at how people when they get on my boat, at how they are like, they literally are in awe of the area and some of the water we float here. I had a family on my boat just the other day there were three boats. The grandparents were in one, the parents were in the other, and the three kids were in mine. And we're fishing through this valley, and we're fishing dry flies to rising cutthroats in the upper portion of our valley here. And
Yeah.
They're novice anglers. They're new to the sport. They're worried about hooking you, which is a really nice thing and thoughtful of them. However, and then it happens. That moment when the cutthroat rises up underneath that fly and hovers there, and the kids were squealing in my boat. The fish eats, they set up, and away we go. Right? Those moments are what make I think anglers for the rest of their lives.
That is cool.
And this family, the 15-year-old son, and that happened multiple times through the day. And they were fish between 10 and 16, 17 inches. And that's not a bad way to start your trout angling career.
Yeah, not really at all, especially on dry flies and seeing the eats and everything else.
I told them, I said, you know how you always hear about that term, like you should have been here yesterday? I'm like, well, today's yesterday. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. Let's do this, though. A lot of people haven't been out to the Yellowstone or even experienced it. So I'd love for you to kind of compare it to, how does the river look and feel in comparison to, like, say, the Madison, where the Madison, you have the Million Mile Riffle. It's just riffles forever.
Right.
And it's almost nondescript. So some people struggle with that.
Mm-hmm.
But the Yellowstone's different. So if you could talk about how that is different, that'd be great.
Well, I think it's important to start to talk about the Yellowstone as like an ecosystem and how it starts on the south end of Yellowstone National Park and what they call the causeway, comes down through the lake. Then the lake boils down into the river and flows through this western high, what they would call sagebrush mesa landscape. And it kind of comes through, and it in some ways it has some similarities to the Madison, but by and large has its own unique character. My opinion is the Yellowstone is they're very large pools that extend quarter mile, and they kind of stair step down. You have areas where it just flattens out and glides, and can be rather indistinct. You have areas that have really good elevation change. So you're kind of moving through riffle pool. But what from my perspective is that it has very deep holes in it. And those deep holes provide refuge for fish. And then those refuges are what I believe really attributes a lot of the size quality fish, the size category and quality of the fishing in the Yellowstone, is that they have deep pools to escape to, right? Yeah. They can get away from harm's way. When traffic gets heavy, they can just slide off their feeding areas and down into deep water, and they can lurk down there and be safe, and they can feed down there. So, for the fishing aspect, it's really important to kind of identify areas on the Yellowstone where fish are actively feeding. We look a lot for big drop-offs, right? And whether that's on the bank or midstream where you have a rocky shelf that goes down into deeper water. And fishing those effectively are what put fish in the net.
And when you're fishing in Yellowstone from a boat like that, are you anchoring up and fishing those areas? Or
sometimes.
Are you fishing them on the fly? Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
A little bit of both, to be honest with you. So there's areas that you kind of want to cruise through and see if you're taking hits there. There are areas where we'll pull over into an inside bend and we'll work the seam between the fast and the slow water. Or if there's a gradation of stream flow, so really fast, medium, slow, that medium water holds just a lot of fish. It has this kind of special chop to it, and they call it the diamond chop. Some people call it choppy or whatever. Yeah. But we pick up a lot of fish in there, and that chop indicates typically a change in bottom structure and a change in speed. And
so describe, I was going to say, describe in more detail what the chop is. How would somebody who doesn't have the experience maybe recognize it?
So you'll have a fast tongue of water coming down through the main stem, and then you'll say go over a small drop off, or there'll be a change in depth, And then if there's an inside bend, you'll have this kind of slow water to the inside. And that space between the real slow water and the fast water at the change, depth change, is where you find this chop. And it looks about like that big. And the reason I was told it's called diamond chop by my friend Mark Bolton was that in the sun, it glistens like a diamond. And that's where you want to put your fly.
I like it.
Right?
And it's perfect positioning, right? I mean, you talk about, I got a conveyor belt of food. Oh, I have a drop that's going to give me a slowing of water so I can sit and wait. And all that food's going to fall over the chain. I'm going to stand there and eat and eat and eat and eat. And
or I'm going to dart out into the fast water and eat a fly and come back into this nice slow water where I don't have to expend energy.
Exactly. And then if I'm worried about some type of predation, et cetera, I just boom back into the hole.
You're exactly right.
I mean, you talk about an ideal circumstances, kind of like a prime lie, but it's almost the entire river, you know. It's wild.
And then you have this, like, if you have a deep hole below it, you know that those fish will every day migrate up into the kind of mid-shallow water to feed on, benthic life, nymphs and sculpins and whatever, terrestrials, etc.
Yeah, very cool.
We have a fantastic terrestrial season here.
I bet.
It's one of the best terrestrial seasons I've experienced in my fishing career. When it's on, it is as good as anywhere.
Is that more July, August, or is that more August, September?
That's late July, August, extending into September.
Okay.
And it's, we're known for the hopper fishing, right? The Western hopper fishing, but also beetles. On the Spring Creek, small ant patterns work really well up against the bank, and beetle patterns as well.
Yeah.
And those fish midday when the heat of the day starts to come on and insect activity starts to increase. If there's a little wind, it blows them in the water. And
lucky snack, cheeseburgers for everybody.
Love it. We love it.
Speaking of that, let's talk about some of the Spring Creeks. You probably fish a lot of beetles and ants and terrestrials, et cetera, in those Spring Creeks. And, there's quite a few available. So tell us about what's available there and access, et cetera.
So Paradise Valley and Livingston area is home to three of the world's most famous Spring Creeks. It's Armstrong Spring Creek, it's Depew Spring Creek, and it's the Nelson Spring Creek. And they all really come from the same aquifer. If you look on a map, one's on one side of the river, but right across the river is the other one, right? And in my mind, and I've fished the Spring Creeks in Pennsylvania, I've fished Spring Creeks in Wisconsin, I've fished Spring Creeks in Vermont. I love fishing them. I fished them in Europe, in England, and for your money, the Paradise Valley Spring Creeks offer some of the best trophy class fishing in the country. And if I could spend a year, 365 days on one of these Spring Creeks and write a book about it and financially make it work, I would, because they're remarkable places. It's this very unique set of circumstances where water temperature is very stable, and the water chemistry is such that it's perfect for growing aquatic vegetation and insects. And the fish just get into this pattern of behavior where they go on these feeds and they just feed all day long. And if something moves them out of the way, another one moves up into that prime line, that feeding line, they feed. And they're gin clear so that you can literally watch the fish eating, and learn a lot about behavior and how to use that behavior to catch fish.
Right. And not only eating dry flies, but eating nymphs.
Oh, yeah. Nymphs, midges,
aquatic worms. I mean, it's wild.
Terrestrials, scuds, sow bugs. The list goes on. They're wonderful. Now, it's a pretty technical piece of water, but the fact of the matter is, if you just make a few adjustments to your approach in your fishing rig, it can be very accessible trophy class fishing.
Cool. We're going to talk about that in a little bit when we start talking about spot and stock. So that's great. So you fish all three creeks pretty regularly, or are you're allowed to guide on all three creeks? Correct? Is that?
Yeah. And so I work with an outfitter here at the Nelson Spring Creek Ranch, Nelson's Guides and Flies, and Tucker and Jackie Nelson really specialize in Spring Creek fishing. Tucker Nelson's probably spent more time on a Spring Creek than any other angler I've ever met, having lived and grown up on the ranch there. And they have just amazing insight into what's going on. And so I do guide on them. I probably guide at least 50% of my days on Spring Creeks, another 30% on the river, and then another 20% in the park. Yeah. And so I enjoy it very much. It's to me, it's the kind of the pinnacle of fly fishing. That's just my opinion. I mean, other people like other things, but like the concept of spot and stalk, which we'll talk about in a bit, is this is where that game gets played.
Yeah. And the elements that are involved, one, you have a really good metabolic feeding temperature with Spring Creeks.
Perfect.
I mean, you described it well. You compared it to like Pennsylvania. I'm from Pennsylvania. I mean, there's incredible Spring Creeks here.
Sure.
And then you talk about the clarity of the water. And
absolutely clear.
How you can see fish. Well, it's vice versa, right? They can see you too. So
Correct.
it's a comparison model. So yeah, they're pretty fun to fish. They're a different realm. Give us a few tips on fishing Spring Creeks if you're fishing a dry fly or a dry dropper, et cetera, and you're just kind of out there whacking them.
Well, I would tell you the first tool in every angler's kit is their eyes. Sometimes I'll take a pair of binoculars with me just so I can really watch. But observing the water before you walk into it, before you charge into it, like notice where the fish are lined up. Are they moving around feeding? If they are feeding, are they like swinging all over, or are they just staying in one little lane? Kind of gauge like the feeding, I'm going to put it in air quotes, frenzy that's going on. Sometimes they'll be swinging all over, chasing each other around to get into position to eat. Other times they're just sitting there and you'll just see them open their mouth and they'll just move 6 inches, right? Yeah. And that's when like things like casting and approach all seem to really matter on the Spring Creek, right? Yeah. So like when I see fish that are actively and aggressively feeding, I know that I'm actually going to probably get a little closer to them than if they are just sitting in one spot.
Right. They're a little distracted, right? It's like
exactly right. When they're on the feed, they are, and this happens during the PMD hatch, the sulfur hatch, and the blue wing olive hatch on these Spring Creeks, is that they will be so focused on gobbling and taking in calories that you can wade within almost like 15 feet of them.
Oh wow!
But you got to be cautious and you got to be careful, right?
Yeah. It's fishing.
Yeah. When they're feeding, and they'll feed all day long. When they're just kind of like eating, I call it junk feeding. They're just going to take this, stop and wait, take this.
Yeah.
Then you got to be a little bit more cautious in your approach. And if you see a fish that's just pinned to the ground and not moving, even though he's sitting right there, probably not feeding at all. Yeah. So you just kind of want to move on from him.
Yeah.
But give him some space and allow him to go back to feeding.
You mentioned some of the hatches. I mean, you talked earlier about, hey, we got great terrestrial stuff, but you mentioned blue wings, PMDs, et cetera, sulfurs. What are the like big kind of prolific hatches that you look forward to every year? And
on the Yellowstone River, I look forward to the Mother's Day caddis.
Okay.
The Mother's Day caddis comes on right before our runoff season starts. And some years it's a hit, some years it's a miss. But it's one of the only times I've seen in my fishing career like large floating mats that look like large pizzas in the back of eddies of this caddis fly. It's the American Granom, black body, kind of dark greenish abdomen, and it's really well imitated with just like a peacock curl bodied ex-caddis. And I like to drop a little soft tackle off the back end of it to look like an emerger. And when it's on the Yellowstone, that hatch is probably one of the premier hatches in the area. We have green drakes on the Yellowstone. We have the salmon fly that comes off early, and it's a very fast moving one, but we have golden stones as well. And what I think is probably the most underrated and consistent hatch is the mutant stone or the midnight stone fly that hatches here throughout the summer. The nymphs crawl out at night up onto the rocks and hatch, and it's like a size 10.
Size 10 stonefly kind of
Yeah,
thing?
and it's got like a tannish grayish body, and it's kind of our staple through the summer here. Early in the morning, a chubby with a rubber legs is a great rig kind of to go with, up against the banks, and up against structure. A
Yeah.
lot of fish get caught on those. Royal chubby, purple chubby, all those kind of, in my mind, imitate that midnight stone, and that isn't like one of those mass hatches where you have thousands in the air at once. They kind of trickle off, but they trickle off
All the
all
time.
summer.
Yeah.
And those fish, they know they get keyed in on them. Our spring creeks have some of the best PMD hatches I've ever seen. And we also have great spring and fall Baetis hatches. We have spotted sedge. We see prolific midge hatches on our spring creeks as well. And then we're kind of starting to head toward our fall Baetis or our fall blueing olive, which is like a 22.
Mm-hmm.
And like catching a 18 to 22 inch fish on a size 22 fly, I don't think there's anything better than that. So
it's pretty
that's
wild.
kind of like where I go.
The only downfall is trying to get that thing out of his mouth.
Yeah, exactly right.
Right.
Or like preventing the 6.5x or 7x from
ripping. Right.
Yeah. We can talk about some techniques to prevent that from happening in the third segment of our talk.
Let's definitely do that.
When but you say that also has just like epic, there's an epic fall green drake hatch, gray drake hatch on the Lamar. We see the Hecuba, we see mahogany duns. It's an embarrassment of riches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you just rattled off 20 different hatches. In a small little region. I mean, that's what's cool, right?
I just love turning rocks. That's the first thing I taught my daughter to do, was how to turn rocks and identify different bugs.
Yeah, and just pick size, color, maybe.
Yeah,
but really size and shape. You get that silhouette, and you're good.
Got it. Exactly right.
When you talk about the hatches, like I'll use the example PMDs. You go to like Island Park in the park or something like that. You got to have every version of the entomologic phase, I guess it would be, to be successful. Is that like that there for you on the Spring Creeks, or are they less selective of like, if it's PMDs, you can fish, a couple styles and be very successful?
So I would say early on in the hatch, as the hatch gets rolling in June, mid-June, late June, somewhere between, I would say, the 15th and the 25th, right? Those fish will key on just about anything you put out there that resembles the PMD, right? So size and shape, yellow body. On spring creeks, we favor thinner tide flies. So like sometimes your production fly is a little too heavily dressed, but a thinner version of it is really kind of makes a difference with those fish in that clear water. As the hatch progresses, they get caught and get targeted or spooked. They get more and more and more picky as to what they want to eat. And so I keep my box for the Spring Creeks, a specific box, PMDs, and it starts up at the top with duns. I have spinners at the bottom, right? And in between I have emergers. And then I have another box of nymphs. And so I use the good old-fashioned PT nymph in dark olive, typically underneath Comparadun or a Last Chance Cripple, designed in Island Park, right? And so then that's when the game gets really interesting. And those very slim tide flies, and sometimes I've got to tie them myself because you can't find them that aren't so heavily dressed.
Right.
And so I like the Bubbleback Emerger by Davey McPhail. He's a British fly tyer, but I've adapted some of his patterns for the Spring Creeks. I love a really slimly tied pheasant tail nymph. 800-year-old fly, still crushing it to this day. If your box does not have a series of pheasant tail nymphs, it is not a nymph box, in my estimation. But
they're I would say brutally deadly flies. I mean, they really
deadly.
are.
Yeah.
It's
and
like,
so I've, just simple manipulation for the water that you fish on of those patterns. Learn to tie a pheasant tail. It's so easy to tie. Go online. YouTube has hundreds of videos. You can even see Frank Sawyer, who invented it, tie the fly. But starting to take those patterns, and if you tie flies, go home and flip some rocks and take a look, take some notes, go home and just take a look and see if the ones you get in your fly shop are good or if there should be some changes to it.
Yeah.
That's why I said earlier that like one of the best tools we have in our book are our eyes, our observation, and watching like if a fish is eating off the surface, is its mouth opening and coming on the surface, or is it turning on a fly and then you're seeing its tail fin break the water?
Yeah.
Those all make a very big those are the big tells on what flies I'm going to use to approach a fish with.
Yeah. The pheasant tail, one of the things that's really fun about that fly is tie it in like 3 different sizes, skip a size in between.
Mm-hmm.
And those 3 different sizes, they'll address so many flies, so many bugs. I mean, you
The
flip a
pheasant
rock
tail-
and you're like, well, is that 3 tails or 2 tails? It doesn't really matter. It looks about the same size.
Yeah.
If you have those 3 sizes, man, you could be deadly with them. And then the same fly is the hair's-ear.
Yeah.
Very similar. Very
Yep.
similar. It's just so simple.
In my career, I've gone back and forth between having hundreds of boxes and a few boxes, right? And I'm kind of in a few boxes phase of my life now. And those 2 flies are in there. And I guide with those 2 flies. And those day in, day out, those 2 flies produce fish.
Yeah,
I don't care where you go in the country. The other one is the woolly bugger. The woolly bugger, it's like you don't know what to tie on, strip a woolly bugger around. It's nobody's winning the Nobel Peace Prize for fishing yet, right?
No.
So like just try stuff.
That's awesome.
Do it wrong until you get it right. That's kind of the fun process of all this, especially if you're just beginning in the sport. And like, I think sometimes people like come out, they get in a boat with a guide and they feel like, oh, I'm not good enough, blah, 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 blah. It's all noise. Go out, have fun, right?
Yep.
Your guide will help you. He'll point you in the right direction. You'll learn some new things that you'll be able to apply everywhere. Don't worry about it. Just go out and try. Try with those basic flies that catch fish everywhere.
Right. And get your fly in the water.
Yeah, dry hook never caught a fish, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I love the woolly bugger context too, because we were just up on the Smith in Montana. We had a permit and it was still high water and it was pretty tough fishing. And we were fishing streamers and trying to move a lot of water and just get attention. We got a couple follows and I said, let's just attach, 12, 16 inches off of it, a woolly bugger. And it was like night and day. We just started smashing them on the woolly bugger. And it was like, they were seeing the big one or hearing it or identifying something. And then you'd hook them on that little fly. And that thing was crystal green, olive woolly bugger. It was deadly. Yeah, it was killing it. So
it works. Hey, it works, right?
And they're cheap. And, they're easy to tie.
And they're easy to tie. I think sometimes when I go into a fly shop, they're relegated to the not sexy portion of the fly displays, and I'm always kind of like, yeah, that's still a great fly,
right. Yeah. Well, we always have to remember, right? A fly shop is designed to be attractive to a customer, not a fish.
Exactly right.
Right.
I'm guilty of that 100%. I've never driven past a fly shop I didn't like.
Right. You look at those bugs and you're like, look at all that flash. Look at all this. Fish is like, hey, look at that. That kind of looks like my lunch. All right, cool.
I'm always looking at it going like, how'd they stack all that material on that little hook?
Yeah, right. Some guy sat in his basement just one night going, man, people are going to love this. He didn't think about the fish. He just said, people are going to love this.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. We've covered quite a bit, but what I want to do is wrap up the show with your spot and stock techniques.
Sure.
If we could start out with, probably either before I leave the house is how I get ready, or when I stop at a shop, these are the questions I ask that are important. It's not what flies are they eating, it's where are they at, or et cetera. If you could kind of start from the very beginning, and then let's just walk through phase by phase, and I'll try and jump in and, try and get more detail where we can.
All right, great. So I define spot and stock fishing as like you see the fish feeding, right? You target said fish. And you're presenting flies that you believe are imitating the natural form of food to that specific fish, right? So as we were talking earlier, the spring creeks are perfect for that. There are places in Yellowstone Park that are perfect for that because you can actually see the feeding activity, which tells you a lot about the behavior of the fish and what to do next. And so when I'm going to a spring creek to fish, my day starts early. I'd like to get to the lake or river, or in this case, a spring creek early, because a lot of times if there's a hatch going on, there's often a spinner fall in the morning or late in the evening. And that means that there's dead bugs on the water, and spinner fishing can be one of the most important aspects of targeting trophy fish this way, right?
Yeah.
Because they're not under a lot of pressure to eat. They're coming up. They're taking the thing right off the surface. And if you can put the right spinner in front of them, it's great. But it starts early, so I like to get there early. And again, I go back to my eyes. Sometimes I even bring binoculars with me as I start to get myopia in my 50s here. I bring a pair of binoculars, and those binoculars will tell me a lot about, like, are they eating a spinner? Are they eating midges? Midges tend to hatch out in the morning during the summer, especially. And then it helps me with my fly selection. My second step is once I get kind of to the river, I'm sorry?
I'm going to jump in because that's a good point, because I think when a lot of people hear, I'm going to bring my binoculars,
right,
and they start looking for fish with binoculars, that's very difficult to do. You have to be a pretty competent binocular user. But like you said, there's so much else you can look for. You can look for, are there riffles in that area? Is the water deeper? Is it a certain type of bug that they're eating that I'm not seeing? And I can zone in on those areas. So I really like that topic, because when I first started with binoculars, I saw it as fruitless. I was like, what is this? I can't even, where's that fish? And I bring them up and down, Yeah. I could never get in the right zone. And then when I learned, like, oh, wait, you're not necessarily looking for fish. You're looking at a zone, and you're scanning the zone and going, okay, what's all around there that's going to make it attractive for a fish, and what can I use to my advantage?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, Christian. Listen, there's so much going on in a kind of like a stretch of water. I break it down into a grid, and I just kind of go through it systematically like this, right? And then what I am looking for, exactly what you outlined, I'm looking at the surface, and then I'm looking at the bottom. The bottom tells you where the depression is. 9 times out of 10, the fish is going to be in the depression, right? Mm-hmm. So you want your cast, you want to be behind the depression and casting above it, drifting the fly into it.
That's right. We talked about that on one of our shows of, you got to have, your fly needs to land in a sacrificial zone. That's a zone that you're saying, I don't need to catch the fish there, but I need to catch it. I need my fly to present itself before it gets into the window of sight for the fish.
Yes.
Right? So if I'm casting 3-4 feet above my fish, because it can see 1 or 2 feet above itself.
Yeah, and the cone going up, right?
That cone going up, exactly. And then my fly is going to come out of their field of vision and into their field of vision. That's my strike zone. That's when I'm really watching. And then the same thing, before I pull my fly out, if I made a miss or I didn't get to eat or I'm going to change, I got to be out of that zone, etc. So you made a perfect point there. I love that.
So I'll just relate a story to you on this. This year I had an angler. He's an excellent tactician skills, and he worked that zone better than anybody else I've ever seen. He did not, there was no wasted movement or casting, and he would literally drift it 5-6 feet, pick it up 5-6 feet, and he just had it. He knew where the fish was. He knew how to lead that fish in the certain kind of water we were in, and then he knew when to pick it up so it didn't spook the fish. Yeah. And I watched this man probably catch 30, 40 fish in a day.
Yeah.
It was like a doctor with a scalpel. It was really amazing to see somebody that skilled do that. All I did that day, net fish, take out hooks, tie on new flies. It was one of the easiest days I got in my life. And really, I learned from my client, which is another thing I would tell everybody, is that, be a lifelong learner. You can learn something from everybody. I learned things from those kids in that boat that day, right? They were catching for the first time in their life. In the spot and stock game, though, the next step is like, how do you approach that water, right? And I think this is where I see a lot of mistakes by anglers of all levels, is that we kind of charge up onto where we want to go, or we walk like we're walking to our office or in the mall or whatever, and instead of like really kind of like saying, I'm going to stalk this animal. I'm going to go at this like I'm predator and they are prey, right? And so moving in, so you're not sending out bow planes and ripples across the water. If you do, that you're stopping and letting them kind of die down before you start casting, etc. And then being heavy-footed on the banks is a surefire way to really spook a lot, especially in small spring creeks that are so clear. They'll spook fish all the time that way.
Yeah, because a lot of times there's aquifers, et cetera, that shoot off under the banks, they'll carry sound, et cetera. And then I really like how you said stalk fish, but I think the difference between stalking fish and stalking, say, animal prey, et cetera, is that most people, when they're stalking, they can see and they know where the animal is.
Yep.
But in fishing, you don't always see or know where it's at. So you have to pretend as if I believe something is there. So I'm going to continue to stalk until I'm proven wrong.
Right.
And if you have that mentality, it changes, right?
Yeah. Right. The conditions are met, right? It's a prime lie. It's a feeding lie. You've identified it. You've seen a fish in it before. And I'm a big fan of visiting my favorite holes without my fly rod, because I want to see what's going on. That's what tells me that when I do show up with my fly rod, what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Great activity around here that I do is every once in a while I take the dog to the river and I just walk the river and I just spot fish. Hey, let's go find some fish. And it's really unique how you can do two things. One, you can, like you said, it fits the parameters. There was a fish there. The other one is there was a fish here last time. Oh, there's a fish here again. And you start to see those repetitive instances. I think it's Rick Haffel wrote a book, and it's like how to spot fish. And he used, I think it was Rick. It was one of the three. It might have been Morris. But they had white silhouettes of fish where they said, this is where the prime lies are on the river where fish are. And you would look at the rivers, and there was actual scientific evidence around having that white fish and it being a remembrance of how to read water, et cetera. Really cool book. But long story short, once you see those and you identify them, you start to see them again and again and again. And you go, I got 5 of them now. Now I got 6 of them. Now I got 10 of them. Okay, now that's 10 places to look. So,
and then the brain just starts to recognize those spots wherever you go. And that's how you start translating from like your home fishery to the new one you went to, right? You're like, that looks exactly like. Why not? My other trick for that is like get in the habit of looking at the bottom of the stream.
Yes.
Look at the bottom of the stream and then look for motion that's different than all the other motion around it. Look for a shadow, right? And once you start doing that, you're kind of all of a sudden using the predator's binocular vision to kind of tap into what predators do. They look for motion first, right? They see something like when a lion looks at a herd of zebras, it sees the zebra that's limping in the herd because it's looking for unique motion, right? After I kind of start that approach, then it's really making your first couple casts count, right? And being patient. Move up into position and make your cast count. Now, I've had plenty of opportunities over the years to watch flood casts come back and catch that fish later. But the first 2 casts are probably where you have the highest probability to catch that fish. So make your cast count, get into a position where you're going to think about your drift, casting up into that sacrificial water, and think about it coming down where you might stand to get the best drift, because the cast is secondary in this game to the drift. The drift is you can cast a short amount of line as long as it's accurate and the drift comes over in a manner where they're eating, and that might mean in a small slot or it might mean in a larger one, but getting that drift and standing where you know you're going to get it and that you don't have a big eddy in front of you playing with your line, right?
Yeah.
Then it's fly selection, right? I've chosen my spot, and then I'm like, what are they eating, right? In a spring creek, it's really easy to tell sometimes because they're either eating, and I mean this grossly, I don't mean this minutely. They're either eating subsurface, just below the surface, or on the surface. If they're eating on the surface, you'll see their mouth. It'll look like a big white mouth. We've all seen the videos, right? Some of those Todd Moen videos that he produces, that where the fish comes out and eats it right on the surface. The mouth is out of the water. If you're watching and all you see is a dorsal fin and a tail fin, that means they're feeding somewhere here, right? And this is the zone for the spring creek, right? The spring creeks, they love to feed in that top film and just a couple inches below. Mm-hmm. And then underwater, you see them like this, and you see them opening their mouth, eating underwater. Anything below a foot underneath, that's a nymph to me.
Yeah.
Or a swimming nymph, or a scud, or a midge, or whatever. Then I make my selection based on that, based on what I've seen and what I know has happened or worked in the past, or what's going on as a trend in behavior.
Yep.
And you can get that information from your fly shops. They should be able to give that to you. And then I try, in my case, I always like to double up my chances. I like to play the odds, the law of large numbers. It's typically, if they're eating spinners and I can see they're eating spinners, I'll just fish a solo spinner. But I like to drop off a really slim tide pheasant tail nymph.
Yeah.
I learned that trick from Tucker Nelson. Yeah.
Yeah.
He ties his PT nymphs very slimly. It's and very in that clear water, that cripple emerger with that nymph below it is to me become one of my favorite rigs.
Yeah. I like on the spinners hard flies, more like almost a Euro style fly where there's just no friction because the spinners don't have a lot of buoyancy to them, right?
Correct.
You throw in a rusty spinner, or sometimes I throw like a pink spinner, works really well for PMDs. And if you have a hard fly, you don't have to put weight on it. I mean, you drop a fly in the water, it's always funny, right? You drop it in the water and it disappears and you're like, well, why do I need all this weight? But you don't a lot of times, right? You just need to be so slim, and just a little bit of thread or, like a clean peacock herl as a body can work really good. So it's
there's a fly tyer in Vermont named Chuck Kashner he ties even a little, just the tiniest little egg sac at the back with the quill body.
Yeah.
And his spinner, I think the fly was in that book Guide Flies by Schodemeyer there. And I've known Chuck for a long time. He's a fantastic fly tyer. That's a guy who's spent a lot of time watching fish,
taking examples home and things like that. Yeah. Super cool. Super cool.
Sometimes if it's a really small, like we have this Western sulfur hatch, which is kind of a blonde Baetis. They're 22s. Sometimes I'll put it off the back end of like a size 20, Adams, or just something visible that's going to act as my strike indicator.
Right.
Yeah. And that helps a lot too, because spinners will sit on the surface, but they'll also sink a little bit. I caught a really nice brown trout on the River Itchin on a sunk spinner this year, and I was just be out beside myself. Yeah. And the guy I was fishing with was like, well, that's not our tradition. They should be up on the surface. It's their own. They eat sunk spinners too.
Right. My net is a tradition.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point too. Really, you made a couple points I want to touch on real quick before we end the show. But the one is, put the odds in your favor. If you can't see your fly, sometimes the chance of doubling up and giving yourself something to see so that you can actually be indicated by the hit is really important. So, you have to use your own judgment, right? I learned that fly fishing for salt in permit.
Yeah.
They wanted me to throw a big, heavy Avalon, and I just was like, when I try to throw this thing, if I'm in any kind of water up to my waist or up to my chest, I just can't seem to keep that thing out of the water. So I'm going to go with a lighter fly, but I'm going to anticipate that I'm going to have to put it in a little different location so it'll sink faster, etc. So use those things to your advantage. You know yourself better than anybody else.
Correct.
The other one that I really liked is you indicated, if they're on the bottom and they're swimming back and forth and they're eating nymphs, etc. Right? We talked about that like cone of vision for a fish, right?
Yep.
So when you see a fish that's moving side to side, wider and wider, you have to anticipate that fish is probably going to move further for its food. So now all of a sudden your strike zone becomes even larger. So don't be afraid to throw out to the side of the strike zone and see if that fish moves to your fly or not. And sometimes it'll move to the fly and then it'll come back and you'll go, okay, I'm going to stop. I'm going to rest for 10 minutes while I tie on a new fly and I'm going to do it again. But I know that fish is going to move. I just need to get the right fly in front of them to have them take a chance. So,
Yep, that's 100% correct. And it's really about like adapting to the conditions that you have in front of you, right? And really kind of saying like, what do I have in front of me? What am I trying to accomplish? And then creating as you go along. And I think that's a wonderful thing about fly fishing. I mean, it's not easy to begin with. And then just complicating it further like that makes it, for me, delightful. I love that. I love the fact that from the beginning, you've spotted the fish. That's the fish you want. Or the fish is there and maybe you're fishing some cover. And you're not necessarily fishing it blindly, but you're like, the fish is there. I've seen a splash on the surface. I can't see the fish, but now I'm going to try to untie this knot, right? Or solve this puzzle and put a fly in front of that fish in a way that it can't help but not eat it.
Yeah.
And when it happens and you put all those kind of things together in a row, I don't think there's anything more rewarding. And I guess I'm fortunate enough to have the Nelson Spring Creek and the other Spring Creeks to guide on. And to be honest with you, I learn a lot as a guide for my own fishing just by watching. And I always go back to that. I'm like, well, what did you see? When if somebody tells me they couldn't catch a fish, I'm like, what did you see? Tell me what you saw first, and then tell me what you did.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the whole element of being a coach, right?
Yeah.
And why is your coach always so knowledgeable? Well, because he sees good and bad, and he learns from both.
And sometimes you can honestly say it's okay to say I don't know. Let's go over and take a look. Yeah. Let's go see what's going on. Yeah. I mean, that's half the fun. I mean, like you're saying how you walk your dog. Like I go to my favorite holes in the middle of winter.
Yeah.
I just want to go visit them. They're old friends. Like I haven't seen them in a while. I want to see what's up.
Right. And the Mitch Hatch is prolific, and you're like, oh,
I know. All of a sudden,
nobody's out here.
Holy cow, they're feeding. Right?
Yeah.
Where's my fly rod? When you go back the next day and you catch a couple fish in the middle of winter, and everybody else is watching football. You're like, hey, I got some fish.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, Jan, it was great having you on the show, man. I learned a ton about that area. I hope you have some extra space in the yard or a room or something, because I'm going to definitely come
we
visit.
We got next room for you, Christian. Come on up.
I invited myself. It sounds so good.
It's okay.
Well, hey, again, thanks for being on the show, Jan. We'll get people to get a hold of you. They can get a hold of you at the Nelson's Ranch if they want to book you as a guide. And your name of your company is Fin and Feather. So
Fin and Feather Enterprises.
Yeah, feel free to look him up. He's on LinkedIn. I'm sure you're on the web, etc. And again, Jan, it's great having you, bud. We'll talk to you soon.